The seat taken?
Nobody's in the seat that I ain't taking, son.
So this is Sabacc?
Sabacc.
Yo, welcome back to Sabacc the Block, a very special Bad Batch edition, which we will be doing each and every Friday night. Joining us this week, we have the lovely, the talented Rachel Cushing is in the house. Hi, how are you doing, Rachel?
I'm very good. Thank you, RB3, as always. I'm really excited to be here. I know that everybody knows me as this big fantasy nerd, this big Game of Thrones person, but my first nerdy love, or one of my very first, was definitely Star Wars, and it's very exciting to come on here and talk about that with you.
And it's so exciting to have you, obviously, because we know how busy you are, and we know you are constantly going from gig to gig and working in different projects. So having you on any show is just a privilege. So thank you once again for doing this. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm excited to talk about the Bad Batch because I feel like there's a lot to get to. So I want to get right to it, Rachel. Specifically when it comes to the first thing in my notes right now, which is what I was noticing last night. And I don't know how connected you are personally to the Twitter convo, YouTube conversation area aspect of like a Star Wars show, or how much you were connected to it during The Mandalorian season 1 or 2. But I don't know if you've noticed what I kind of felt like I was noticing last night. And I don't know if this is just me, if this is just my Twitter feed and I'm kind of generalizing, but is it just me or is no one talking about this show? Because I went on Twitter and I was like, Fennec Shen, no one's talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, by nature, we can only compare it to, right now, The Mandalorian. Or, by extension, you can do it with the Marvel shows and stuff. I mean, we're in this new Disney Plus era of extensions built on, these big movie properties. And we've had some semblance of this before with, Clone Wars and Rebels and Resistance and everything. But if I didn't watch The Mandalorian at midnight, I had to avoid Twitter. Like, you couldn't go near that. And otherwise you were guaranteed to get spoiled about what had happened. So yeah, there is definitely a lack of that with this show. And I don't know if that's because it's animated. I know that there's, Star Wars fans that just can't really get into the animated side of things, which is too bad because that's a really amazing side of things. They could be in some ways like me. I didn't get to watching the entire Clone Wars series until pretty recently. I tried and stopped a couple times over the years. I adored Rebels. And then at the beginning of quarantine, I was like, you know what? There's the new final season of Clone Wars coming out. I'm going to push through, the parts of this that I wasn't loving the first couple times I tried. I'm so glad I did. And that's definitely set me up to really appreciate Bad Batch. But I think there's a lot of people like me and who were like the old me who, gave up on Clone Wars or just wasn't going to, get into that, or it's too many episodes to get there, or whatever it is. I think there's a little disconnect with the animated. And it's the only thing I can really think of as to what makes this any different, because it's weekly Star Wars and you would expect people to be really excited about that.
Yeah, because that's my thing. And I know a lot of people might be saying, how could you say that about Midnight? I'm not talking about like conversations. I'm just talking about like what happened with WandaVision or Falcon and Winter Soldier, where people were just like, what a crazy episode. That was fun. Or like, I can't believe that happened. Like vague, fun tweets that everyone can kind of engage with just to see what you thought of that episode that week. And I saw that with every major Disney Plus show. Like we said, The Mandalorian, WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, and it felt like this was happening. Thursday night was the Disney Plus night if you're staying up late and watching the show, and then you're going to give your really, really vague tweet about it, or if you're a non-nice person, you're going to spoiler it and spoil the whole episode. But either way, there's going to be some sort of like engagement with the episode. And for some reason, The Bad Batch has had 4 episodes now, and I feel like the first one, people were like, this is crazy. Kanan's here. We have Deepa Bilibas here. Like, this is wild. I was tweeting that out, and I feel like a couple people were too. But now it's died down so much to the point that I'm like, we're in episode 4, and I feel like no one's talking about this. And I'm gonna push back a little bit on the animated stuff, just because I feel like Clone Wars season 7. I don't know if you were there watching that when it was premiering, but I felt like that was kind of a little, at least a little bit popular, not super popular, but I feel like a lot of people were kind of engaging with it. I don't know if is it because when they first announced this show, Rachel, I don't know if you remember this, where a lot of people let out a big, when it comes to like, remember those wacky clones in the first 4 episodes of Rebel season 7, they're getting their own spin-off show. And everyone was like, oh, okay, sure. And no one really was too excited about it, especially when they announced Ahsoka and other major shows. Is it because of that? Is it because of these clones in the Bad Batch kind of storyline as a pitch as a whole?
Potentially. I mean, that was not the arc that happened in the final season of the Clone Wars that got all the attention. It was all the Ahsoka stuff, like, and
yes,
for good reason.
Yes.
But I feel like when people were talking about that and discussing that and all over social media about it, that was more of the focus. And I do think that there was a little bit of like a for the Bad Batch, for the reasons of that arc was good. I actually liked the idea of like what Echo's journey was, and I was curious to see where it would go from there. But the other characters, Wrecker was just played for laughs, and like some of it felt a little forced. And honestly, at that point too, I was like, give me Ahsoka. That's the story I want to be watching right now. So I think that there's potential there. And then there's also, you would hope that Star Wars fans are open and ready for whatever Star Wars these various creators are going to give us. But at the same time, The Mandalorian opened a new era, like just post Return of the Jedi. There's 30 years worth of material before The Force Awakens that has only ever been explored in books and comics. So like everybody's sort of very excited about what all that means. And so, like you said, excited about Ahsoka and excited about the Boba Fett show and where Mandalorian goes next and everything else. So now we're shifting focus back to an era which, quite frankly, we've covered a lot of between Clone Wars and Rogue One and Solo, a Star Wars story. And we're getting Obi-Wan. And, I wonder if we are getting to a breaking point in terms of we kind of know this era. Like we got the arcs of the people we really cared about. Again, Ahsoka. But did we really want to know what happened to some of the other clones? I mean, we got Rex and Rebels, so we do know that some of them are still around and kicking and whatnot. But was it a story anybody was really all that interested anyway in?
Yeah, I feel like they're really banking on the fans of the Clone Wars.
Yes,
really into the Clone Saga stuff. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Fives was a famous one, but Fives, Rex, all that major crew back in Clone Wars season 2, I want to say, when they first started kind of getting their own story arcs. And I feel like those are the fans that they're kind of going after when it comes to the Bad Batch. But even those fans are kind of used to a different character dynamic where they're all still very similar and not, like you said, Wrecker just being kind of a goof, right? And which is a little bit more aiming towards the kids audience, which is obviously something that we all support. And I feel like everyone at this point knows that that's still the major portion of an audience when it comes to Star Wars. But at the same time, I feel like I still feel like there is. I think a lot of people might not be giving this the shot that it deserves. I agree. Because I'm actually really enjoying this season, and I think they're doing some pretty interesting stuff, considering the 4 episodes we got of the Bad Batch and Clone Wars Season 7 wasn't necessarily the most exciting. But so far, I think it's really enjoyable, and I feel like, I don't know. I just feel kind of disappointed because I feel like this is the first Disney Plus major show. Obviously, there's been a lot of Disney Plus shows that have come out that have probably not been super popular, but this is the first like Thursday night, midnight premiere, super major show that I feel hasn't been as engaged with as other shows. And I don't know why that is. By the way, I was the one guy who was like, yo, give me a Martez Sisters spinoff. Give me the Martez Sisters.
I just rewatched season 7. I might have skipped those episodes.
I love that. I love those girls. Those are my girls. I grew up with those girls
nice.
On Coruscant because that's where I'm from. But no, I really enjoyed Clone Wars season 7. Every arc I thought was pretty fun, and I'm actually enjoying this season, even though I still think they did my boy dirty. Right when they picked the one clone that I'm like, yo, I like that Crosshairs dude, and they're like, we're making him bad, and I'm like, oh, damn it, that's my boy. But yeah, I really want to get your thoughts, obviously, moving on this season as a whole. Obviously, we've only had 4 episodes, but I feel like we can kind of give a general thoughts when it comes to 4 episodes so far, what we think of the season. What do you think, Rachel?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most, it's like the strongest 4 episodes of any of the animated series, because it has the unfair advantage of having been set up in the Clone Wars. And also, I mean, episode 1 picks up right as Order 66 is happening. So again, it picks up right where Clone Wars ends as well. So it has the benefit of the momentum and having met the characters and knowing the world and understanding where we are in the world in terms of the Empire just starting out. But at the same time, the amount of story work and character work that has been done in 4 episodes, like, blows the first 4 episodes, Clone Wars and Rebels, out of the water in my mind. Like, I just really think they're doing so much And that's why I really hope people find this. Maybe this isn't appointment television for people, but I'm not entirely sure Clone Wars was either when it was airing, or even Rebels for that matter. I'm hoping, that this will pick up with people. Maybe they'll be like, I'll binge watch it later, or there'll be, a bit of a word of mouth steamroll thing happening. But to me, it's very smart. I think that the ideas that it's exploring in terms of like self-actualization and evolution are really interesting. And you just said that about Crosshair, and I actually really love that about him, and that he's being set up in this villain way. But that moment that he has with Omega, when she realizes what he's going to do and that it's not his fault, and that, there's other forces at work, and with the chip, and, and all of this stuff about identity, it's one of the themes that Star Wars gets so right a lot of the time. And I really think they're hitting on all cylinders in this show with that.
Absolutely. And obviously, I want to get into the Omega part of this too, because I feel like that's a major portion that some fans are kind of split on, but I feel like they're coming back, especially after episode 4. But when it comes to the macro aspect too, I think this is always a fun, weird, nerdy thing when it comes to like the big question of like, what happened to the clone troopers, right? Everyone kind of gives a big shrug. If you're like a super non-Star Wars fan and start watching the movies in disorder, you kind of think they're the same thing just because you see white on white helmets, and you're like, oh, it's the same. But then it comes to the progress of like, what's the difference between a clone trooper and a stormtrooper? When did they fade away? Did they fade away? Were they just shut down? What happens to Camino in this aspect? I think those kind of macro military questions of like, literally what happens to Department of Defense of the Empire is kind of interesting. And I think it's kind of exciting because it really presents a question that can kind of be related to I'm not going to go as far as to say like this is real world stuff, but I feel like it can kind of be related to like real world type scenarios when it comes to the idea of militarization of a nation or a country or a world, or in this case, a galaxy. And where does that militarization come from when you convince your people that there is no more war to fight? Then how do you get people to be riled up to join the military? And it's something that's super interesting to me. I don't know what you think of those aspects so far.
I think that it's really fascinating to see the Empire in its earliest stages, where we're already seeing the tyrannical part of it. But at the same time, like in last night's episode, when they're on the planet and the stormtroopers or clone troopers are walking down the street and people are cheering them on. And Hunter and Omega are talking, and the idea being, well, the war's ended. Of course people are happy when the war is ended. That's true. Who wants war in the galaxy? So we're still in the stage of the Empire being potentially looked at as a good thing, and not just by the tyrannical pieces of it, by people who just want peace and don't quite understand what they're in for, in terms of, all of the codes, and everybody needs a code now, and you have to, fall in line basically. And they're slowly going to learn that. And I think seeing that play out is going to be very interesting. And you see people like Saw Gerrera, who all right out of the gate understand that this isn't a good thing. And then you see these 5 or 4 at the moment, Bad Batch members also going through the evolution of realizing what it was they were fighting for, what it means now, what they want to do, not just for themselves, but, for any sort of greater good. Are they going to become bounty hunters? Are they going to join the rebels? Like, where everybody's going to eventually, we know where it all eventually goes. So this is that little piece in time where we don't know all of the answers. So that's what I think creators are banking on, is that there's this little piece in time and a few outstanding mysteries, like where did all the clones go? What happened to Camino? Lama Su seems pretty nervous about, their clone facility and whether or not they're relevant anymore. And that plays in, I think, to the mystery of who Omega is. So there are questions that are being asked in this series that maybe people didn't, weren't clamoring for answers to, and yet are still intriguing.
Yeah, and it's always interesting too, and I know obviously we're reading really deep into this, animated show, but I feel like there's an interesting aspect when it comes to, I like that you mentioned Lama Su, because I feel like, I don't know if it was this episode or the episode before, where he had that line where he said, we have to convince the Empire that we're still profitable or something like that. Like we're still making money and we're still worthy of a superior type of soldier, of creating a superior type of soldier. And then the question there, when it comes to the difference that Lama Su doesn't really see the difference between, so far at least, the Empire and the Republic, and the idea of like what that will bring when it comes to, if you really think about it, the Empire right now is mainly it will be creating this stormtrooper program for policing purposes and not for any type of military insurrection purposes or another military that's popping out, because there isn't really a major military except for Saul that we saw in episode 2, kind of fighting his own battles, but it feels very small scale, which presents another question about policing. And what does that come into effect when it comes to funding of policing? And those aspects too, because this isn't really a military endeavor anymore. It becomes more of a policing thing across the galaxy. And I thought that was kind of a fascinating question as well. And obviously, I forget the character's name, the Empire Colonel, who is like in charge of that program.
Oh, not Tarkin, but the other guy who brings in the new recruits that Crosshair then has to, in the last episode. It's interesting. And I think so telling, because like the higher ups in the Empire, they're racist. I mean, alienist, whatever you want to call them in this world, but like they look down on everybody. And so it's natural for them to look down on clones. They're inferior. And so my guys who I have trained, I'm going to prove to you that they are worth 100 of your clones. And that dynamic and that, plays into why I think there was a changeover. Because if you're just talking like purely strategic and militaristic and like, how would you win in any given situation? How would you police the galaxy? How would you occupy the galaxy? I don't know why you don't use clones. They do everything you tell them to do. Like, so for them to want to change over to actual soldiers is interesting to me. And I think that some of that is rooted in this superiority complex that so many of the higher ups in the Empire have. I mean, you kind of have to be these power hungry elitist types to buy into this propaganda that the Emperor is selling and this idea of like, ruling the galaxy. So I think there's just like little tidbits in there that are, like I said, I kind of am enjoying this idea of seeing the Empire become the Empire from within in this way.
Yeah, and I like how he put it too, because he said something like, there's something about a person's loyalty that's just inspired by his love for the Empire, and him wanting to fight for his empire. Something like that is what he sold Tarkin on. The idea of like just a person's loyalty to their empire being the selling point. Like a person has to see themselves in a stormtrooper in order to be sold on this product that is the Empire, where it's like, hey, everyone around the galaxy is taking up arms and gathering together to support this one empire. And that being the selling point of being like, well, if everyone's doing it, I mean, it must be something that's worth it. Instead of saying, we got these crazy clones from Camino who are serving us, and everyone's kind of like, all right, that's a little odd. On a selling perspective, when it comes to selling people on the Empire, on a propaganda perspective, I guess, which presents that question, which I find to be fascinating, because again, it comes to that idea of what exactly became of the clone troopers transferring to the stormtroopers. And I hope they get into that, because they kind of already are, but I feel like if they really double down on that, I feel like that would be a fascinating conversation.
I can't see this show not culminating, whether the show culminates or one of the seasons culminates, in what happens to Camino. Like something big has to go down to the facility, to the Kaminoans, to Lama Su, to Nala Se, to, whatever, because, the danger of prequels is we know how this ends and we know what characters aren't in future movies and future storylines. So everything we do that's a prequel has to still add up to that, and I remember the whole not argument, but debate around Rogue One was none of those characters, in a lot of people's minds, mine included, could survive that movie. Because if they had, they would have been fighting in the rebellion in the Star Wars Empire Strikes Back and in Return of the Jedi. I mean, you can do some stretching and you can figure out that they were in some outer rim planet or whatever, but it works better for me to have the way that movie actually ended. So there's no mention of actual clones or Camino or any of that moving past this stage in this history. So what happened to them, like you said, is an interesting question. And so to me, that feels like a pretty big reveal, a pretty thing to lead up to. And they're playing up the mystery so much. I mean, like you said, the scene with Lama Su in episode 3 is we got to prove that we're, necessary to the Empire. Like we have to prove our worth. We have to prove that, that we have something to offer them in some way, shape, or form. And clearly that is tied up in whatever is going on with Omega, and by proxy, what it happened with the Bad Batch and all of the, genetic alterations that happened with them. So whatever that is will be a big reveal, and then how it all plays out. I feel like a big set piece is going to happen on Camino at some point.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a fascinating conversation, right? Where it's like your buyer happens to be one company. And it's like, if they don't like your product, I don't think you're just going to sell to someone else. I don't think
they're not going to let you sell to anybody else.
They're not going to just let that happen. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be pretty violent. And I don't know, because again, we see that scientist, again, I forget his name, in The Mandalorian, who has a Mandalorian patch on his jacket. And he seems to be some sort of like, I don't know, cloning expert of some sort. Right. We can only assume if he has that patch that is a Camino patch, and he seems to be some sort of connection towards Camino. So there's something there that makes it feel like maybe they just won't just destroy everything on Camino. Maybe there will be some sort of alternative option there for the Empire, but it still presents that question as far as like, I don't think it's going to end too well for them. Speaking of Omega, let's get to the Omega conversation. First of all, are you Team Omega? That's the first question I have for you. I
think I needed to get past the first episode to become that. And there were things about her that I really liked in the first episode. And there is, as you said, like at the end of the day, Star Wars is as much, if not more, meant for kids and then adults. It can be both. And, it has done a lot of work to be for both. And I feel like there is a pattern, again, particularly with the animated shows. You had a young Ahsoka in Clone Wars. You had Ezra in Rebels. You had Grogu in Mandalorian. And here we are with another one. And so there's a knee-jerk initial reaction, at least there was on my part, where like, again? But then my storytelling brain, the brain that I work in the industry, I understand producing content, and I understand that there are some tropes, if you will, that make sense. And this makes sense in the Star Wars universe. You have the naivete and this wide-eyed appeal of a younger character, and a younger audience is going to sympathize and empathize and want to, go on that journey with them. And then you have the other characters surrounding that. And she's also part of the central mystery, which makes her very interesting. But I do feel like Filoni's done a very good job over the course of these 4 episodes in differentiating her from all of those characters that I mentioned in those other shows. There isn't as much, there's a lot of protecting going on, but there's a more interesting dynamic between her and the Bad Batch in terms of acceptance. And I really like that. I like the outsider vibe of it. I like the idea that she is a clone, but just a different kind of clone, but maybe not so different as we think, because clearly she's an evolution of some kind. And what is she an evolution of? And of course, everybody thinks she's like Force sensitive. And I think that that's on the table, but I do hope that it's something a little bit more left field than that. But we'll see. But I do think her dynamic with the group is very good. And I think they're managing to keep her from being too annoying, which sometimes the younger characters can be in shows like this.
It's always one of those things where they have to add a scene where she just wanders off, or like obviously last week with the Nexu, I believe was last week, and this week with as well, that one as well. But with this week with the puppies, she just likes puppies and she wanders off because she's a damn kid.
But the show built, what I like about the show is that I feel like the writers were like, we know that's what you're going to say, so we're going to lay the groundwork, which one, she's, according to clone growth, she's like, what, 5 years old? She's only ever been in one place her whole life. So those two things right there should excuse a lot of behavior. And then one of my favorite, somewhat throwaway, but not really throwaway lines was in the second episode when they were with Cut and his wife and their 2 kids. And it's the episode where the Bad Batch, truly decides to make Omega one of their own, even though initially Hunter wanted her to go with Cut and his family. I forget Cut's wife's name, but she was basically like, this is what kids do. They wander off. They will find a way to find trouble. It's what kids do. And so I give it to the writers. You said it. You said it. You made the statement. You clearly established that this is what is going to happen. And then it happens. And you know what? Yeah, that's what would happen in this situation. And that's why actually I think last night's episode was my favorite episode, because I loved the idea of her being so in over her head, but I love the way that she, navigated through that, and the idea of being won over by Fennec briefly, but then being somewhat suspicious too, because it was juxtaposed with the Bad Batch also being in over their head. I loved the scene where they couldn't figure out how to bribe the guy to not give them the ship codes. They don't understand. They've never had to buy food or survive in a way where it didn't draw attention to themselves. They've been soldiers, and they've always just had the tools that they need whenever they needed, and they're quick on their feet, and they can survive any battle situation, no problem. But now they're doing something they've never done before. They're on the run. They're in a damaged ship. They're trying not to draw attention. They're trying to, raise a child, which none of them know how to do. So everybody's in over their head in this episode in really kind of fun but smart ways.
Yeah, and it really is interesting, especially the parent dynamic, right?
Yeah.
The idea of these guys were created to kill, essentially, whether that be droids or people or whatever the case may be. It's war, it's military, what they were created for, and yet they're put in a situation where they're expected to raise a child, and they don't know how to do that. Yeah. Especially Hunter, where Hunter is supposed to be the dad character, and Wrecker's clearly the mom, as we all know.
The favorite uncle.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's just a joke, but I really feel like it's that classic dad where he's trying to figure out, how to, teach lessons along the way, but also be a father when he doesn't really know how. And obviously, a lot of it is going to be protect her, and sure, if any harm comes towards her, find a way to get her out of that. Speaking of that, I kind of want to talk about what you think that she's leading to. You said that you've heard stuff about her being force sensitive. Is that where you think it's going?
I mean, that seems the most obvious. So if you take the premise that the cloners on Kamino created the Bad Batch with enhanced genetic abilities in very specific ways, which just makes sense when you're trying to create an elite commando force. So what's the next step? How do you make the next best elite soldier? I mean, that's they're in the business of creating soldiers. And so how do you convince the Empire, since they're on, we established they're the only buyers in town, that their soldiers are worth buying? So what's the next step of evolution? Now, as far as we know, being force sensitive is not necessarily a step in evolution, but you would assume the cloners would try. I would assume the cloners would try how to actually genetically create force sensitive people. To me, that just makes sense that they would dabble in that some way, shape, or form.
Well, so, does this kind of connect to The Mandalorian? Am I reaching there?
No, you're not at all, because it sounds
like you said, it sounds
secretly
exactly,
been still trying that whole thing.
I was going to say, this sounds exactly like The Mandalorian, with that doctor saying that Grogu has a high M count, and they're trying to find a way to take his blood and somehow replicate it into other beings. We never got confirmation on that, obviously, with season 2 of The Mandalorian, because we just ended off there and then went into 2 action episodes right after that. But as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, that's clearly what's happening here, where they're trying to somehow replicate midichlorians. Shout out to midichlorians. Every time I say it, I just feel like I grow 10 inches. just because I'm a prequel fan and I love it. But it's one of those things where it's that idea of like, this is now a live action show that has been kind of dabbling in it. Is this animated show kind of gonna add to that, do you feel?
I feel like it makes the most sense right now. And as with all theories and theorizing on shows like this, you can find all the bits and pieces that will add up to your theory. Doesn't mean you're right, because we haven't gotten all the bits and pieces yet, but something as little as in the first episode where she's able to take out Crosshair in one shot. Seems like that's a one shot in a million to be able to do that. Now, she had the element of surprise, so that's helpful. But you could say, oh, that's a force sensitivity could help explain that. How she was able to relate to that the moon dragon in episode 3 on the planet when she was on her own. I mean, again, you could say that was just good observational skills, like the animal's not trying to kill you or hurt you. It just is hungry and needs to feed. So she figured out how to do that. Or it could be force sensitivity. And then everybody's favorite clue from this week's episode is when she comes up to the little animals. I'm sorry, I don't know the alien name, and says, hello there. Who didn't think of Obi-Wan Kenobi in that moment? Like, you just, because it's ingrained in our brains. And if the Kaminoans were to have anybody's DNA, Obi-Wan Kenobi was there. So, you know, like these are all circumstantial.
Yes.
And you can add them up to make this theory work very easily. And so they could very easily pull the rug out from under us. Like, and like I said earlier, I kind of hope that they do, because I would like this to be something a little bit more left field, and whatever her enhancements are, you know, something a little more unexpected. But like I said, I also feel like starting at this point with the Empire, if not even sooner, under the direction of the Emperor, and then clearly all the way through the original trilogy and into the aftermath and into the Mandalorian and everything else, somewhere on some outer rim planet, there are some Empire, you know, scientists who have been trying to create Jedi or trying to create Force wielders this whole time. Like, you do understand the mad scientist aspect of course, they've been trying this whole time. Why wouldn't they be?
And it leads again to the Mandalorian, which also presented that mad scientist aspect, especially with the people in the you know, vases or whatever they were, you know, half created, half, you know, not made people who were in there. I could also kind of pitch a Siler effect. I don't know, no one's seen Heroes, but like a Siler, or like someone who's like, you know, she has all the skills of Hunter, of Tech, of Wrecker, of Crosshair, and now next episode she's gonna accidentally lift a giant,
some giant thing, and be like, oh wait, she's super strong. Hey,
say it in her Kiwi accent. I'm really strong. I can't do it. Look at me, tick. And be like some sort of Deadpool. I don't know, to make another reference.
Nope, it's
of all the qualities. To make a super warrior, I guess, is maybe what she is.
I think whatever it is, it's the next level of clone. Yeah. Because that's what the Kaminoans think they need to be doing in order to stay in business, for lack of a better phrase. And so I'm really curious. And, you know, I don't know, much like the Grogu of it all in Mandalorian, how many seasons we'll have to go to find out. But the idea being that in the meantime, this is a story about characters on the run, characters who are trying to figure out who they are in this post-Clone War world, you know, taking on roles I never thought they would take on. And what does that mean? And, you know, that's the character stuff that I'm in for 100%. And the mysteries and the big reveals and all that stuff will come with time and will be a part of it. And I'm always here for that. But, you know, this world, so long as it's populated by interesting characters doing interesting things, that's why I always keep coming back.
Yeah, and I also really like the way they set it up. I mean, obviously, this is kind of me going back and forth, but the way they set up the Bad Batch characters to be, like, the first question anyone can have is, like, how can anyone not recognize them? But they explained that back in Clone Wars Season 7, when obviously the genetic manipulation kind of changed their faces so they can kind of blend in and be different people. So that explains how they're able to kind of go in and out of places and not be recognized. And obviously they kind of dabbled in that this week with, what's the homie's name? the one they pretended to be a droid. I always forget his name. Echo.
Echo. Yeah.
They did that with Echo, where he has like a robotic arm. They're like, pretend to be a droid, and that's kind of like a fun way for him to blend in as well, because he might look a little bit more similar than everyone else as a clone.
And we do know that based on Rebels, they do grow old. They eventually, will start to look, I think it would be less recognizable as, that clone template that everybody knew. But even in that, like, I always just assumed that most of the time they had their helmets on anyway, so that the average citizen on the average planet may not even understand if they're looking at a clone, because they potentially have never seen one. Now, people working for the Empire aside, they should probably be a little more attentive and recognize the certain facial features and things like that. But I do feel like that's one of those like things that I give it a little bit of leeway in terms of accepting in the storytelling.
Yeah, and I feel like it's hard for me. It's always tough for me, and I know this is the one thing that, if there's ever a negative thing Star Wars fans say about me back in the day, because now they don't even pay attention, it's always that I'm too positive, and it's like, this guy likes everything, and it's like, I'm trying, guys, I'm really trying to be critical. But it's one thing where I really love the idea of just exploring the worlds and seeing how everything is now inside this world, because I'm a sucker for Star Wars side quests, which this episode kind of was, if you think about it. I'm a sucker for that. They go to a planet, they're trying to hide, they have to fix a ship, so they find some droids, and it's them along the way. There's a bounty hunter after them, don't know who it is. And that kind of side quest adventure, I think, is really fun. And I'm a big sucker for like RPG, D&D type things inside the Star Wars universe. I tried to do that with this show, actually, with Sabacc the Block, where I played like a Star Wars D&D mini game. And I gave you like a scenario inside the Star Wars universe. Because after a while, if you've watched the movies as many times as I have, there's definitely a formula to this. And they kind of rinse and repeat. So I feel like it's fun, and it's really cool to see how these clones kind of go in and out of that. Before we take off, I really want to hear your thoughts on the idea of a animated Fennec Shan.
I mean, I thought they did it brilliantly. And I think that, some criticisms often come with, like, of all the bounty hunters in the entire galaxy, she shows up, even though we've already met her before. It's like, come on, suspension of disbelief and all that stuff. However, what works on like a thematic level, which is, if you get me on the thematic level, like, I'm in. I'm always in. And the idea that we met Fennec in The Mandalorian many, many years after this, many, many adventures after this, many experiences after this, where she teams up with Boba Fett and Din Djarin to rescue Grogu, a helpless child creature character that needs help and that she's not going after in terms of the bounty, in terms of self-interest and all of that. Rewind to here, where she starts out as somebody who is 100% willing to take the young child creature character and turn him in for the money and kill people to do it and be the ruthless bounty hunter. We know bounty hunters are ruthless, and we haven't met quite enough of them that have proven to be the ruthless characters they're supposed to be. We keep meeting them on their redemption journeys. So I love being able to track back and then see that, oh, full circle. Like, you just made a character come full circle in, a couple of episodes in one series and then 1.5 hour animated show now. And I just think that that's smart. And that's what I will always forgive isn't that convenient if it's smart and it is always in service of the character and character arcs and character journeys. And I think that that's what this did. Plus, she looked awesome. And I'm so glad that Ming-Na Wen came back to do the voice. And I totally feel like she's going to be coming back this season, because we are not 100% sure who hired her. I mean, it kind of seems like it was Lama Su, but that's not guaranteed. So there could be another player in all of this, which would be cool too. But I was totally on board with it. I thought they did a really good job.
I thought of that too, and I definitely was thinking of. I can't believe I thought of this, but I had to because I'm a Guardians of the Galaxy fan. I was like, "We don't deal in children." Shout out to Yondu,
Nice. Well done.
and Sylvester Stallone. I was like, "Yo, she's breaking Ravager rules, and she's not even a Ravager." I was like, "Wrong universe, wrong universe." Shout out to RB3. He's a big Guardians fan too. He knows what I'm referencing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that scene where Sylvester Stallone comes in and says that, I was saying that to her as I was watching the episode, because I thought that too. I was like, yo, that's kind of brutal to kind of like have bounties on kids, and also the way she was killing people left and right like it was nothing. And I was like, well, I guess this is 26 years before. Shouldn't she be like 19? Like, she's got to be like young, right?
Yeah, I feel like this is meant to be her starting out, you know, and because she was good, she made a lot of great moves, did a lot of smart things, but she didn't accomplish the bounty. And later on, we know that she's like basically the person that like 99% of the time always gets the bounty. So like you can buy it a little bit more if this is early on, but.
She becomes Crosshair. She steals Crosshair's powers. And that's how it all comes together. Because of the Mandalorian, she's a sniper. I'm just joking, guys. But I felt like that was probably the only thing that kind of took me out of it for a brief second, where I was like, damn, she should be like 18. There's no way they're going to convince me like Ming-Na Wen is like that old. She's if this is 26 years before, she's definitely younger. But either way, I enjoyed seeing it, and I also really like that point as well, that she is definitely more brutal to kind of show that arc and where it might lead to, and then maybe by the end of the season she kind of grows a little bit as well. Rachel, thank you so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. I really, really hope that more people give Bad Batch a shot. I think that there's a lot of really interesting stuff. And we didn't even talk about how gorgeous it is, especially again, this last episode.
They stepped it up, right?
Beautiful.
I feel they stepped it up.
I feel
too. Like this is a lot better than what we've seen before. And
even like in the background, because so often in animated shows, like the background characters are just a regenerated model of the same, you know, whatever, but I never felt that way. It's populated by a lot of aliens. There's been a lot of locations that have really been different from each other, but beautiful and interesting in their own ways. I really, and what's his name? That voices all of them?
Baker.
Good Lord, give him a trophy or something, because how you do this many characters in this such articulation and giving them their own personalities is just so impressive. And he was in the Clone Wars too, but this I feel like is a whole other level. So, you know, this show really just works on a ton of levels. I really look forward to it every week, and I just hope that, you know, more people give it a chance.
Yeah, no, I do too, and I think it's funny because I was like, they saved money with D. Bradley Baker being the only member in the cast, and then they were like, we're just gonna go crazy in the animation, which is kind of what they did, because we all know that's not cheap. And I feel like they spent money on it because it looks really good. And it looks like they spent time on it as well. So shout out to the creators of the Bad Batch. I'm having a blast watching the show. I think it's a lot of fun. And obviously I'm a sucker for these characters already, so I highly recommend everyone enjoy it. Rachel, where can everyone find you?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Rachel J. Cushing. Hit me up, all the geek stuff. I'm there.
RB3.
Hey, what's up, guys? You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Director RB3.
And you can find me at Squad Leader Race. And obviously follow us here at First Cut. We will be doing more reviews of the Bad Batch here on Sabacc the Block. Either way, guys, for the First Cut crew, we're peacing out. Peace.
Sabacc.
Fair and square, baby. Fair and square.